Welcome to the Best Advice podcast. And Fraser and I are super excited this week to be joined by one of the most well-known, most prolific people in financial services, Lee Forde. Hey, Lee.
Hi, how you going? Thank you for that introduction.
People know you and know of you.
Oh, do they? Okay. I try to keep a low profile these days.
Fair enough. Lee, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
It's probably been a few, I guess, over the years. From a work point of view, when I first started in banking and then financial planning, I'm sure everyone's heard this before, but there was always, you've got one mouth and two ears. So use that in that ratio. So you should be sort of listening twice as more as talking. You can hear things and learn things rather than just sort of preaching. So, that's a good way to learn what's happening. I've always tried to be like a sponge, so if I'm learning something new, like with you guys, for example, I'm not the best with technology. So sometimes I'll just send a message saying, look, what does this mean? What does that do? And, or Ben, you basically have taught me how to use LinkedIn. So, you've got yourself to blame for that when I get on there and do stuff. And Fraser, you helped out heaps with the study groups with trying to teach the older advisors the Control F, to look up stuff in the exam because I couldn't sort of teach that properly. So you know what you're good at, and you then feed off others who are good at other things. So no one knows everything and is good at everything. So I guess was always taught, promote and do what you're good at, but what you're not good at, seek help and, don't try and do it yourself. You can get into more trouble than it's worth.
A couple of things spring to mind instantly when you mentioned that one mouth, two ears, obviously teamwork, allowing the fact that, the room could be filled with good ideas and opinions, but also the concept of being open to learn or open to know or open to understand. Is that where you think that comes from?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've worked for a couple of banks, they had a lot of acronyms, like there was, team, together, everybody achieves more, and there's no I in team. But then what was it? There was M in me or something, there's all these little things. So especially if you're working in a group environment, which typically a bank was, and even in financial planning firms, you've got other staff members, it's good to allow everyone to have a say, hear what they have to say, and then, build from there. Because, and even the same with clients, like I've learned so much from client questions when I'm trying to explain something and give advice. They think of things that I would never think of. And I then use that in subsequent meetings saying, in case they're thinking the same thing or something like that. And then at least it helps storytelling, but also to get the point across.
Active listening, it sounds like active listening is a big part of that, right? So it's not just wanting to throw your information out there, but also then really sponging off what's coming back at you, whether that's listening or reading, as we do on, platforms, for example, like LinkedIn, where people are writing things. What is that? What you're thinking with regards to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just I find these days a lot of people sort of have their say and then it becomes gospel, you know what I mean? And it's sort of like, well, there are other opinions and, once upon a time you could agree to disagree, you know what I mean? You can both hear each other out, have a complete different view, but it doesn't mean one's right, one's wrong. It just means it's a different view. And I always look at the destination, what are we trying to achieve? And I sort of look at sort of the meeting of the minds, I guess. It's sort of like, okay, well, in financial planning terms, we want the best outcome for a client. So we both agree on that. We want, not to defraud or, do the wrong thing. So we agree on that. So once you get that meeting of the minds, it's just the route you take to get there may be different, but the outcome is the same for everyone. So I think once you get that initial, this is where we want to be, then it's just a matter of working together to find the best way and most direct way, to get there. But sometimes there will be different methods to get there. But ultimately, as long as the goal is joint and agreed and met, well, then, everyone should be in a better position.
Do you think, sorry, Ben, do you think active listening or listening is a skill that people need to train for, because I think if I go back to some of the first podcasts we ever did, you had a list of questions and you were so worried about the questions or the thinking about what I have to say, wasn't listening enough, or I've listened to podcasts where there was no listening going on, and that active listening becomes a skill.
Absolutely. It's got to be taught. Like I feel fortunate that when I started in financial planning, I had a mentor who had been a planner for 25, 30 years at the time. And they sort of gave me that history lesson, where we've come from, where we are, where he believed that we're going to become or try to get to. And he used like a basic sales sort of, technique, saying, well, let's pretend you work at or back then, it was a video library and, video store, and you're trying to sell this video VHS cassette, and that was how I was sort of initially trained. And it was like, well, sell this to me. So it had nothing to do with financial planning or anything like that. It was just selling a product or advising on a product. And I remember at the time, I thought of my own VCR that mum and dad had at the time. And it was like, oh, it's got this feature, that feature, da, 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 da. And he said, stop. He said, what have you just done? He said, I, as the potential client, have said nothing, and you've told me everything about the particular product. And he sort of said, what you need to do is invite that conversation from the client, saying, well, what's important to them and what are they seeking? Because there is like a beta brand as well as VHS, for example, so you're talking about VHS because you've got one, but they may think beta, for example, or, it might be one insurance company compared to another or something like that. So that become very clear to me that you have to listen first, and then you're in a better position to say, oh, okay, so you want this, this, and that. And then when you go through that conversation at the end, it's always good to get them to repeat what they think they want. And that way you hear it in their terms, sort of like the teach back method, I guess, for, informed consent, you're listening their terminology, their language about what you've spoken about. And then you can see what might not be understood, what's being missed and what has been understood. And that way you can further clarify, or, you can actually, hopefully in a better, stronger position, to be able to, help the client meet their needs. This is exactly what they're looking for.
For the kids at home, before Netflix and Blu-rays and DVDs, there were things called videos. And there were two formats, which was annoying. Lee, just getting back to the sponge and taking in lots of information, but, I'd reflect that you do read a lot and you do take on a lot, and you're actually very good at asking questions when something doesn't quite make sense or you're looking for clarity. On the other hand, there are some things that I've noticed over time that you're very passionate about. How do you take in that corpus of information that you read and are trying to understand, and then process it and analyze it, and how much shifting goes on from there?
Yeah, look, I'm trying to calm down and relax, these days and everything, but you sort of, when you've been around a while in a certain spot, history sort of repeats itself, and it can get very frustrating when you see something that's happened before, and, whether it be financial planning or anything, and, you can see the same thing repeating. But if, the hardest thing I find is having peers to understand and listen and agree on. Like you look at a LinkedIn post and, one person will say, we've got an advisor shortage. We need more advisors. Then the next post is, oh, we've got enough advisors. They're just not using AI and digital advice properly. And, if they do that, then that solves everyone's problem. So you've got two competing, fully qualified, more than informed experts having completely different opinions. And that's all good and fine. But in a perfect world, what used to happen was they would get together and have a discussion and maybe get the best of both worlds. Maybe we do need more advisors, but maybe not as many as the other person thinks. And one thing I've been, I guess, trying to do is like when we gave advice in the 90s, it was a lot simpler, but the compliance was a lot simpler as well. So I'm trying to apply old processing rules with the new compliance regime. So that way, to me, I get the efficiencies of the past and the compliance of the present. That's sort of what I'm, working on. And I'm grateful to, I'm part of a great licensee that understands that and allows me to explore and do things like that, knowing that I'm, fully compliant with the client, because that's I'm very compliance focused. I'm very the code of ethics, I think, is one of the best things that's ever come in, but I know, that's probably controversial, which I don't know why it should be, but I've used that, I believe, to my advantage on behalf of my clients, to streamline my processes. But, licensees and advisors, everyone has their own process. My way is not the only way, but I work, my client base is middle Australia, mums and dads. I don't care really what balance they have, but most of my clients, don't own a computer or don't know how to use the one they've got. So I have to do old school stuff because they don't do Zoom meetings mostly, or, I don't have that capacity. So when you talk to a product provider who only really wants digital clients, it's very, difficult for me on behalf of my clients to get work done. For example, and some products, if you don't have an email address, you can't even set up an application. So they've either got to set one up, or maybe one of their kids have got one. We used to be able to use our own, but the product providers, I think through privacy or some changes, don't allow that anymore. So, people probably listen to this laughing, saying, oh God, what a problem to have. But that's the real problem. And because we've got the aging population, everyone retiring, people I see are typically my age or older, and that's their reality. But I like dealing with people. I like seeing people in person, having a coffee across the table, eyeballing them. That's what they're used to. So I travel and see people, where I know some advisors these days don't even meet the client in person. And that's fine for younger people and that generation that have that technology. That's great, but it becomes difficult if they don't have that technology. Who looks after them? They still have a need. And I think it's sad if they lose access to advisors because of that situation, because it's very hard to, I'm well behind with technology, and I find that every time I learn something, there's an upgrade or an update to the system, and then the process is a bit different, or the links you go to get somewhere changes, and it's like, oh God, now I've got to learn that again. So, and I think back to my mum and dad, they've never owned a computer, never had one. I think I said to Ben that when I see mum sometimes for lunch or tea, she does crosswords, and if you can't find the word in one of her dictionaries, I've got to Google it to work out the crosswords. But it's not cheating, because she's tried every avenue. So I go in and I can, fix up the word, but they don't have that, simple pleasure of doing that. So that becomes my burden, I guess, or my pleasure. And my sister and I got my dad a mobile phone a few years back, but he still can't figure out how to text. So, when they have doctor's appointments and things like that, something might change and they've sent a text message but not rang. So mum and dad rock up and they're like, oh, no, we've changed that. We text you. And just simple things like that. Even with the census that's just come up, it's all done online, but they have to try and get a paper-based version, which doesn't automatically come out anymore. Now, I just think that's sad for that generation, that they're forced to do things. I understand, the benefits of it for everyone else, but you can't just ignore where people have come from. And even way back when I was in the bank, we had passbook accounts. When I first started in the bank, they opened a passbook account for me for my pay before I even had a key card account. And, mum and dad still have that. And then you can't get a new passbook now, but at least they've preserved, grandfathered essentially, people that have got existing books. So eventually as people pass away, they will close. But you have to allow that opportunity. You can't just say, right, we're changing technology, we're doing this, everyone's got to learn. It's just, to me, it's not realistic.
Lee, I want to dig into something you mentioned in that conversation about the human connection in things and how you like to I've got a lot of things on my list out of that, what you just said, by the way, about things, like your passion around people not being left behind and things that you find unjust. But I want to go back to this human connection piece and back into your two ears, one mouth conversation. How important is it to you that the people that you're working with, having relationships with your clients, how important is it to them that they're heard?
Oh, very important. And as much as you don't want to admit it, like, even my wife sometimes says I can be stubborn and this and that, like all of us, I guess. So, and I've got a, daughter that's just turned 16, as I mentioned before. So she, tells me all the time that, what I'm doing wrong. So thank God. I didn't realize I knew so little, but anyway, yeah. But definitely. And sometimes you got to be pulled up on it. Like, I'm not perfect. And, sometimes I'll just have my mind set and it's not till someone raises it. But I've always been someone that uses examples. Like I'll say to someone, tell me an example of that situation that explains that. Like I find that easy to understand. Like everyone talks theory, but when I hear a comment or an idea or a theory, I follow it right to the nth degree and what the outcome is. And if that's not a practical outcome, then the theory doesn't even register with me, and then it's not till someone says, well, hang on, let's look at that theory to prac. Can't it work like this? And that's where, probably could like that. That's a good idea. And that's where, like I don't comment as often as I used to on LinkedIn, but I still read a lot of things on there, especially because there's a lot of advisors that, are very tech savvy and, they're very, very good with marketing and all that. Like I've never really marketed myself. I was told about 13, 14 years ago, if you don't have a website, you don't exist. So I pretty much got one because I felt like I had to, because most of my, I guess, clients are word of mouth from existing clients. I originally purchased a book, so I'd work that client base in the beginning. So there's always been someone to talk to. I've got like a solicitor. Some people have referral sources, that can send things, or they might ask questions and bounce off ideas. So I sort of always done that. But, some people have said to me, geez, you've probably got an untapped opportunity through social media, because like I'm assuming it's fair to say that there's probably not many advisors that are, going to be a great competitor for someone that wants to look after lower balances, Middle Australia, Centrelink and all that. I'm assuming, I'm happy to be wrong. And I sort of say to advisors, and this is one thing I learned, that everyone's in a different space, like there's self-managed super fund specialists. I used to do that, but I'm not competent in that field anymore. So I'd refer to someone, I could do it, but I mean, from a standard 10 point of view, I probably shouldn't. So that's fine, and younger Australians, I'm probably not the best equipped. Like if they're trying to buy their first house or, they're newly weds and young kids and all that. But when it comes to pre-retirement, retirement, downsizing, home care, aged care, that's what I've always virtually done. So I've always, and what we used to have was a lot of like internal referral networks. Like everyone sort of knew, oh yeah, Lee did this and Joe Bloggs did that. And you could just pass things over to people knowing that they're going to be looked after, where these days I think it's a bit more difficult because a lot of businesses are structured, well, a client has to fit our mold before we even talk to them, or someone will say, our minimum fee is $7,000 before we even, get through the door and talk to them. So, it's hard to communicate with those kind of businesses because you don't, like, that person may not have that wealth, but you don't know who they are, who they know that do have the wealth. And unless you explore it, most people will be getting an inheritance, which means they may not be start that way, but then they might become that. And they're going to have a lot more respect for you if you take them, when they've got a lower balance and you looked after them when they really needed you. So when other things come in, Lee, we need to talk to you about this. It's not if. So I think there's missed opportunities, there as well for advisors, but I get it that it's a bit different these days where it's more profit and, like we always ran a business to make profit. But, when you sometimes hear things like, well, if AI and digital advice improves efficiency, I just take the view that should mean that the fee should go down because we're given the same advice quicker, which even if it's an hourly rate should be less. But others will view that as, well, we've improved our efficiency, therefore that just, helps improve our bottom line and our profit margin. So, not saying it's right or wrong, but that's how different people think. And I think that thinking where, well, we're going to maximize profits at all costs and this and that, I think that's where financial planning may get a bad name, saying, well, we're just trying to, not rip people off, but we're just trying to do the least we can for the, biggest fee, where if the consumers and government could see that we're doing the right thing, I think, the policies of the future may be a little bit different.
There's so many bits of that I want to dig into, Lee. Just taking a slight step back, though, you talked about your struggle to learn new tech and changes to processes. That to me seems like an analogy to people not understanding financial products, not understanding superannuation, pension, social security. Is there a way that you've sorry. And then the other thing, getting back Fraser to, video SOAs and some of the stuff that we used to talk about, like visual learners, audio learners, you remember the other categories, Fraser. Having to struggle through that, learning to use tech, helping clients understand financial products. Are there ways that you've learned to better get those concepts across to your clients because you have, those similar sort of struggles with technology? What's working with the clients in that?
I draw pictures, and once upon a time in the SOA, we used to have these pre-formatted tables, but trying to create a table in a program is next to impossible. But one of the old SOA templates I used to have through the bank was that, if you did, withdrawal and recontribution strategy, or if you did, roll over into a pension and then, do a lifetime annuity, you could pick your strategy and there was like a table there. So you just had to fill in the stuff in the middle. So I sort of draw pictures and I use examples of different things. Like, when I first purchased my business in 2005, I purchased from a retiring advisor. Now, he was a Maltese advisor, so most of his clients could speak English, but Maltese was their first language. And the biggest fear I had and the biggest feedback I got initially was, look, the previous advisor has recommended you, so we trust him. We automatically trust you, but, we're a bit concerned because of the language thing. And when I explained that to him, and the other bit was location, because I live further away than where the other advisor lived. And I said, well, I can come to you. And that was like, oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah. Well, you can come to our house. So that solved that problem quite easily. But the feedback I got a few years later around the language thing was that, Lee, even though you couldn't speak Maltese, the way you spoke in English and the detail and the time you took to explain it, we actually understand you better than we understood the other advisor. And and one client, this is from a client, they actually sort of said, I view you like a car engine. And I said, oh, okay. And they said, like, unless you're a mechanic, if you're not a mechanic, the bonnet goes up, there's an engine, there's a carburetor, there's an aircon, there's belts, there's this and that. Now, I don't know how all that fits together. So when you turn the key, car starts up. But so they sort of explained that, we knew super, we knew, allocated pension, account-based pension. We knew these terms, but not really what they meant. So they appreciated that I went into greater detail and depth of explanation. And I always get that teach back. I always say before I leave, okay, so tell me in your words what you've heard and what you think I'm trying to do. And I've always, found that helpful. So that was the way that I got around the language barrier, because all these people could speak English, that but it was their second language. And then a few times I'll get like a little agreement signed where I could get an interpreter, because sometimes they could understand what I'm saying, but to read an SOA document, it's like War and Peace sort of thing. So it's, it becomes more difficult. So I had to, and even now, if I'm speaking to someone, say European or something like that, I always make sure that they can not only speak English, but they can read it, because that can be a trap as well. That if, something goes wrong and someone complains, I need to be able to demonstrate that, well, hang on, Lee, you presented this, they've signed it. How do you know if they can't even read? So then I get the family or, someone else involved if that happens. So that's sort of the way I do it. And, I'm, from my point of view, through probably both of you, plus others, like I said, I always pick your brain because I see something I've never heard before, or someone wants me to do something. Like there's Claude, there's Gemini. I think, Ben, you've taught me about those things. I've never have heard of them. Like to me, Gemini's a car, but I don't know, maybe it's an AI thing now. So there's all these things, and even the AI file note thing. Like I've spoken to a couple of people there. The licensee uses, one in particular, and they're claiming, or they're sort of saying now that they can also do the SOA construction, but with the licensee I'm with, they know my limitations. So they said, look, Lee, don't get involved yet. It's not quite right. So I'm just waiting for the green light, and even my, computer guy, like he just does his thing and backs things up and just, says, yep, I've done, everything's been done. Like I don't need an explanation because I'm not going to understand what he's saying. I trust him. And it just keeps everything, going, because I honestly, the cyber stuff, and I know, Fraser, you've helped me in the past with that. Like it's the next level again, you know what I mean? But for me, like I never grew up with computers. I didn't know my first computer, to the late 90s. So, when I started at Westpac back in Melbourne, they gave us a laptop, and we had, I think it was called an intrafund, intranet, not internet. So it was like I don't know if you remember that. It's like an internal thing only. Didn't have Google and all the external stuff. So, we had to, like a lot of us had never sort of touched a computer. So we had to sort of learn how to do it. So I was used to doing paper-based type stuff and using Excel to do projections and all that. But obviously things are slowly changed where now you have to use a computer. So the biggest challenge for me is trying to keep up to speed with everything more than the actual advice process. And, that's something I know I need to get better at.
Hey, Lee, this is how nicknames stick. Lee the Tank Engine, the little engine that could. So I wanted to dig into what you were talking about then when it came to the communication skill that you were using and formatting, the concept of the client, that it's what they remember, not necessarily what happened. So that language barrier became a real breakdown when you could make sure that they could remember the strategy or whatever you're talking about. And I also wanted to touch on the concept of the written word. Sometimes when people read it, it's misinterpreted. And so obviously then you're doing a lot of explanation. So people are then getting their heads around things and understanding or remembering what you're talking about. And when I talk about text being misinterpreted, I think about when people are in the mood, they might read the text a completely different way than when somebody was actually writing it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it does require a couple of different appointments because when someone hears something the first time, it's the most difficult. Then the second time they hear it, it's a little bit easier. Then it's a little bit easier third and fourth and all that. And I always make a point in my annual reviews to always go over what we spoke about. Like, sometimes I might have given, say, trauma insurance advice, 5 years ago. And every anniversary I'll say, look, do we need to revisit that because they knocked me back or didn't want to do it? Or if they've just retired, I always sort of jump ahead and say, look, when you retire, you've got these stages in retirement. At some stage you may need to consider, home care and then aged care. And a lot of them are like, oh, I'm not ready for that. But just bringing it up, it's always uncomfortable the first time, but then the second time, third time, fourth time. And then all of a sudden, when you bring it up, it's not foreign to them. So it's not, like your cold calling type of thing. It's like, well, where'd that come from? You never mentioned that before. And I just let them know that hopefully you don't need those services, but be aware that if you do, I'm already on it and, I'm planning ahead, for that potential. And if it doesn't happen, great. If it does, well, you're not going to, oh God, what do I do? You don't have to panic because I've already looked ahead and sort of consider that.
Earlier, you brought up cars, and just to take a slight detour away from work, I know you're very passionate about cars, and you do a lot of other work in the community and with some disadvantaged groups. You also mentioned working with clients who don't understand English as much and aren't as technologically savvy. Where does that all come from, and how does that help you live your best life and feel like you're giving back to the community?
Yep. I've always loved movies, and one of them obviously was the Dukes of Hazzard with the General Lee, and then Knight Rider with Kit. So I think my wife thought it was a bit of a midlife crisis about probably 10 years ago. I bought a few sort of movie cars, and I become part of a movie car club. I've had to sell most of them, but I've still got the Kit Knight Rider. So Good Friday and other events, sometimes someone might know, like I remember a few years ago, there was a child that is permanently in a wheelchair, and they went out somewhere and someone stole the wheelchair. So, and NDIS or whatever, they wouldn't refund it. So someone arranged for a bit where, there's a gold coin donation to come in, or you can, everyone meets up, and we had thousands of people and we're able to raise money for them to buy another wheelchair, like just simple, things like that. The Good Friday appeal is always good. So COVID, we couldn't do it obviously for a couple of years, but we've got like a Facebook page, and I love doing it. In my own situation, like I've got two children, my daughter Kylie, I've got a son Christopher, he's 11. He's got a severe intellectual disability. He's got autism and he's nonverbal, amongst other things. So he's at a special needs school. So we sort of did this before we knew of Christopher's disabilities, but it's probably taught us a lot more about empathy, patience, understanding, because like he's still in nappies and, he needs care. Like you got to look after him 24/7 because he'll just pick up something outside, put in his mouth, and, there's no danger. So, that has made life a lot harder to get out and do things and all that. So we understand, once a year, the very special kids have like a Christmas party, usually like the Melbourne Showgrounds. I think they do it interstate, but I obviously know the Melbourne one. And we have an invite for that because we've got a child with special needs, but we donate our time, like my wife Faye and myself, and even Kylie now, she's involved with things. So they look after certain stalls or certain things, and it's all voluntary. And then once a year near Christmas, they can all the parents come out with the kids. We have like autism camp where they do special things as well. And the things with, say, autism camp and the special needs sort of shows, you don't have to, like, you don't mean to, but you feel like you need to apologize. Like if people, you go out somewhere, my child acts a certain way, and you feel like you need to apologize. But when you're at autism camp or all these other places, everyone just looks and you get that nod, like we get it. So you don't sort of have to say things. And most people are very, appreciative and understanding, like even in public. I think people these days in general are a lot more aware. When you look at, especially my son, like you can quickly tell that, there's something there. So most people, you get the odd sort of, you look at, discipline your kid and all this sort of stuff, but that's life. I don't say anything back or do anything, but that very rarely happens. But people these days are much more understanding, because you got to be careful that there are some people who sort of become recluses, like they don't have people over. They don't go out because it's just too hard. And there was a time where I sort of felt like that as well. It's like, oh God, you got to, if he has a meltdown, what do we do in the middle of a restaurant? And, he doesn't just sort of sit down and eat and do nothing. He's always on the go. But, that's life. In teaching him that, like he's learning new skills every day through therapy and through the special needs school, that like people that don't see him for a while, they can see huge improvement. Where we see him every day, it's harder to tell. But someone like a friend will come over and they'll say, oh, geez, you can do this, this, and this now. That's fantastic. So, we appreciate that. And it's good to get that feedback from other people as well.
Yeah, that's thanks for sharing that story, Lee. It opens up a whole new understanding of a human being when people share stories like that. And to me, I was writing down things like your understanding your values as a human being, that of a protector or the shepherd, as a human, not just with your family, but with your clients and everybody that with the profession as it's developed, being there to help and guide and as a strong communicator. One thing I do want to call you out on, though, is that multiple times you keep saying that you're terrible at technology and all those nasty self words that you say to yourself. As somebody who is a touch typist, who can type, who can communicate well, who can and leads and helps others, that's not the way that everybody else sees you. So I have to call you out on the fact that you keep saying you're terrible at technology.
You're too kind. Oh, look, I know what I'm not good at. And I don't take offense because, I laugh at myself just as much as everyone else, so that's, I appreciate it, though. Thank you.
But, in the words of Ted Lasso, you are curious about technology, and I think that's the best part of it. You don't have to be an expert at technology, but if you're staying curious about it, I think that's a really, really powerful piece.
Just I agree with Fraser as well on all of that. I'd also disagree with your earlier statement about not commenting as much. I seem to get more these days than even back
I was
in
just
the old
studying,
days.
sorry, on the general LinkedIn page. I'm not talking about private messages.
Just to touch on that, though, the autism camp and not having to apologize, and tying that back to your clients that either don't speak English as well or aren't as confident around their financial position. What do you have advice for listeners and other planners around what they can learn and what they should be thinking about in terms of understanding people where they are and helping them from that point as professionals to move forward?
Things like most of us have probably done in the past is that years and years ago, there was like this personality thing where you were red, yellow, green, or blue, and, there was all different things. So you got to identify the type of person you are. Like in that mold, I'm probably a blue or green, where I'm very structured, step by step, and get straight to the point. But some clients you talk to, they want that, oh, how's your day? How's the weather? And, you can't just bang straight into it. You got to invite them in, get them, into that. So you've got to identify the personality trait of the other person first. And that's just from experience, I guess, when you do an appointment, how it starts, and you get a feel for it. But I guess another thing with communication as well is that, like, my son's nonverbal, but we've learned there's something called, keyword sign, and then, and there's other forms of communication. So that's the hardest thing we've had to learn, is that my son understands when we speak, but he can't say, oh, okay, Dad. Yeah. But if we say something, and even if someone else says it, he'll do it. So he understands. So I've tried to learn from that, and I'm thinking, well, how can I communicate with other, clients that haven't got the background I've got, or think like me, and, and all that. So that's the challenge for advisors and for other people, is to understand the personality trait of the person you're talking to, and have the empathy and understanding of that. Like, if I see someone that's like me, it's beautiful because I can just, no mucking around, get straight into it. But I've had to learn patience and everything over time about, you don't have to rush all the time. And sometimes if you rush, the most important part's missed because they're not ready for that influx of information. So sometimes progressively explaining it, or even if you got to do it over a couple of more appointments, like, when I first started, it was like, first appointment, get in there, get the fact find done, get everything ready to go, get it all signed up, and then go do the plan, come back and present. So 2 appointment sort of sign up. And way back, we used to be able to do same day sale. So technically you could do it all in one appointment, if it was say a pretty simple insurance type thing. Where these days I hear a lot of advisors, they have like a strategy meeting, an introduction meeting, and then so it might end up being 4 or 5 appointments. And I'm finding over time that, doing 2 isn't impossible, but it's not as probable as it used to be. And I think the benefit of that is that, it takes extra time, but the understanding is more. So I'd rather take more time and get a better client understanding than to rush in and do it and then move on to the next client where there might be unresolved issues that then come up. And, when they come up later, it's normally not in a positive, happy type thing. Sort of like, well, I'm feeling like I'm a bit misled here, or I don't know what's going on. So, communication, it's one of those things that you're always learning. Like I don't, I'm not perfect at it, and I'm learning like others. One of my first managers, he gave me a book from Alan Pease, I think his name is. He was a guy from the 80s that was a body language expert, and this was one of the benefits of being in an appointment with someone is that you can read their body language, as to whether they're sort of defensive or, they're not sure, and, all these sort of little things. So, that was helpful. Commonwealth Bank at the time, I think they had something called Cohen Brown, which was Marty Cohen. He was a sales type guy, that would explain how to do things and, how to do that. They're good to a point, but these days it's more advice rather than sales. So where we would like disturb people and plant the seed and get them petrified that they've got to do something straight away, it's now a bit more calm, and, more inviting and more relevant than just, get the sale and, let's get on to the next person. So I think from that point of view, we've come a long way, but unfortunately, like with the scandals and other things that have happened, there is still that sales culture and other things even today. And, that's where you hope the associations and the regulators, and people dobbing in other people that are doing the wrong thing, just to keep us all to account. Makes sense.
Absolutely, Lee. As we wind up here, is there any last bits of advice you would like to leave the audience with?
Just keep doing the best for your clients and always put them first, which should go without saying anyway. I love financial planning. I got into it for probably different reasons to other people, but I mean, just helping someone that's in a bind or doesn't know what's going on, it still gives me goosebumps. And as long as I get the goosebumps, then I'm in the right spot.
See, I was sure you were going to say be an active member of your professional association. And no. Lee, where can people find you if they want to reach out? I
don't think anyone would want me to be honest. So I wouldn't put them through that trauma.
We love everyone, Lee. Hiccups and all. Where can people find you if they want to continue this conversation?
I'm on LinkedIn, just obviously under my personal name. I've got a website that's been set up for One Plan. And if you need anyone or want anything, I can do sort of general advice as well. So, for $220, I can have an hour consultation with someone, at least guide them in the right direction, trying to use a bit of professional judgment. So it's not just, well, Lee, I want this, and then I tell them how to do it. I make sure it's what they need. And if it's not, tell them why. And then, some people like to get that initial guidance and then get personal advice later on. Mostly they understand the value of the personal advice when I explain it, and then they just want to jump into that. So, that's all good as well. But, it's okay to help someone now, and then they come back to you a year or 2 years later when something's changed. And I do get that, which I'm very grateful for.
Very good. We'll have links to Lee's LinkedIn profile and maybe his webpage in the show notes. Thank you for joining us, Lee, and we'll catch everyone on the next Best Advice podcast.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.